I served as the anonymous whistleblower in a story that revealed Texas Children's Hospital, which is the largest children's hospital in the world, was lying about the existence of their transgender program. These things happen in Washington or New York or California, but no way in hell did I think it was happening in Texas.
How old were these children that they would be giving the puberty blockers to?
11 years old.
Wow.
It's like having 1 million microsurgeries on every single cell in your body. On the day of my graduation from surgical training, one of the most important days of my life, 2 armed federal agents show up to my door 3 hours before the ceremony. That's when I knew that things were getting serious.
Just a few weeks ago, the U.S. House of Representatives held a hearing to discuss lawfare against those that were whistleblowers exposing harm to children. Today on this episode of The Lila Rose Show, we are talking with Dr. Eithan Haim. Dr. Haim shares his incredible story of the subsequent lawfare that he endured at the hands of the Biden administration, including federal agents being sent to his door and a U.S. prosecutor even threatening his wife. In this exclusive interview with Dr. Haim, we discuss the current status of his case. We discuss what actually happened to Dr. Haim, what he exposed, what he did as a whistleblower, and then the blowback he received from the federal government. And we explore the incredibly important topic of what happens when a government becomes so powerful that it can use its corruption against everyday American citizens. I hope you enjoy this incredibly important episode. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the show if you're not already. Ring that notification bell if you're listening on YouTube. And if you're on podcast app, make sure that you are subscribed so you never miss another episode of The Lila Rose Show. Dr. Haim, welcome to the podcast.
Privileged to be here.
It's a privilege to have you on. I know we've wanted you on for some time, and your story is very shocking, quite frankly, but also inspiring how you've handled what you've had to deal with. So thank you first for your courage in standing up for the protection of children, even when it has cost you so very much.
Yeah. I felt like I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do it. So.
Well, first of all, for those who are not yet familiar with your story and with you, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah. I'm a general surgeon. I had done my training in general surgery at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, between 2018 and 2023. And it was during that time that I served as the anonymous whistleblower in a story that revealed Texas Children's Hospital, which is the largest children's hospital in the world, was lying about the existence of their transgender program. And the way that Texas Children's TCH plays into it is that it's the primary affiliate of Baylor College of Medicine, kind of like Harvard is to Boston Children's, as part of the academic consortium. And in March of 2022, the hospital had released a statement saying that they're going to shut down the program because of the potential criminal ramifications. And that last part's important, right? They said it was potential criminal ramifications. And that was in response to the Attorney General of Texas saying that these transgender interventions on kids could constitute criminal child abuse. Mm-hmm. So it kind of makes sense why the hospital would release that statement, a few weeks later. But, I was working there, right? Yeah. And I knew what they said was a lie because the people who were doing these surgeries told me they were doing them. And over the next couple of months, I found out that not only was this continuing, right? They told the public one thing and then, they simply took the sign off the door, but they expanded it into a multidisciplinary clinic, right? So this was like a hospital-wide priority, probably like over 1,000 people knew. There were multiple specialties involved. They were integrating the algorithms into every single specialty, from primary care to psychiatry to endocrinology to social work, all the way up to surgery. And this was something that was even built into their EMR. But what makes it so crazy is there was no public interface. Like, the clinic didn't even have a website, which is very atypical. So it goes to show that obviously they were trying to hide it. So I knew I had to do something about it. So I blew the whistle with Christopher Rufo anonymously on May 16th, 2023, right? So almost a year after I found out. Within 24 hours, Texas passed a law.
Dr. Haim, really quick, before we get to what happened after you blew the whistle, which is just incredible that you did that, because I know there was so much at stake for you. Just for folks' clarity, when you say that they were doing, Texas Children's Hospital was doing these, sex change surgeries as an example, what exactly were they doing And, I know puberty blockers is a part of that, but can you just walk us through quickly what exactly TCH was doing with
Hmm.
regard to transgender care?
Yeah, so they had every step of the way from taking children who believed they were the opposite sex, or one of the kind of made up sexes in between, and then plugging them into the clinic where they would get started on puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2, which is before the onset of pubertal development, right? Before the onset of secondary sexual characteristics like breasts or pubic like hair growth, and then
So
after
just to be
that,
clear, how old were these children that they would be putting the puberty blockers, giving the puberty blockers to?
11 years old was the youngest I've seen.
Wow.
Yeah, and important to know that these blockers are just as severe, if not more severe, than the most radical surgeries, because it's like having a million microsurgeries on every single cell in your body. And they do it, the effects these hormones and medications have is to change almost every single natural physiological structure in your body. Because, there's no surgery in the world that can deprive your brain of the hormones necessary to become an adult, or, make your bones as brittle as like an old woman, and that's what they're doing to these kids starting at the age of 11 years old.
So, just to be clear for folks listening, what are the consequences, the potential risks of starting to take puberty blockers at 11 years old?
A good way to initially put it is, so these are the same medications they use for advanced prostate cancer, Lupron, right? Because it castrates the hormones from an individual's body, right? It like shuts the whole system off. And a lot of these older men can't tolerate it because they have such severe mental responses to it. They get depressed, they lose all of their energy, they go into menopause, they have hot flashes. They can only do it for a couple of months before they can't tolerate it. And they're doing this kids who are 11 years old. But it's more than that when you do it to a kid. Because what happens is they essentially do not go through puberty. So, number one, most importantly, you will sterilize them because you don't undergo the exposure to the hormones that allow the maturation from immature sperm to mature sperm, or immature eggs to mature eggs. So if you never undergo that process, you never develop the cellular architecture necessary for fertilization, right? And then you can also develop, like in boys, a permanent micropenis, like in the case of Jazz Jennings, right? Because his puberty was blocked, he never underwent the growth of his sexual organs, right? So you have, adult men who have permanently arrested, sexual anatomy. And the moment that's arrested is when they're 11 years old.
It's devastating. Was the hospital, in addition to the puberty blockers, were they doing any other sorts of, as they would probably call them, treatments for children who
Um,
struggled with gender dysphoria?
so as far as I know, it went only as far to the surgical implantation of puberty blockers. And, it's important to know, because a lot of times they do injections in a clinic for puberty blockers, right? You can do it two different ways. But the children who need surgery are the ones who have psychiatric comorbidities and won't be able to tolerate an injection in a clinic. Because remember, these are like really young kids. It's not like an adult who can like tolerate an injection. So kids with autism who have severe trauma, who will completely flip out at the sight of a needle. You have to put them under anesthesia, right? You have to open up their arm. You have to implant this blocker. And it's not the implantation that's the difficult part. It's fishing that thing out a year later. And I've done that for kids with precocious puberty, right? An actual disease. It's not like that easy. I actually just got done doing a similar procedure on someone, with a piece of metal in his arm. It's not that easy.
So, when you were discovering that this was happening, even after Texas had made it illegal, ultimately, you mentioned Christopher Rufo, the investigative journalist. Tell me about the next steps of when you found out, what gave you the courage, quite frankly, the impetus to be a whistleblower, and then what those steps looked like.
So, when I first heard it, I actually didn't believe it because one of my colleagues, like one of my co-residents, came up to me. He's like, Eitan, like, listen to this. I just did the surgery on this 11-year-old girl who believes she's a boy, and we implanted a puberty blocking device. And I was like, man, like that's crazy. This was in like mid 2022 when like the whole world was kind of waking up to all of this madness. And I thought it was really odd because like these things happen in Washington or New York or California, but like no way in hell did I think it was happening in Texas, and definitely not at Texas Children's Hospital. I had no idea there was a program.
Did you know that every year 200,000 families go bankrupt from medical bills, even with health insurance? For many people, insurance is simply not working for them. That's why I'm excited to share with you about Crowdhealth, which is an alternative model for paying for your healthcare. Crowdhealth takes your bills, personally negotiates them on your behalf, and then sends out a request to the community to help cover your bills. The Crowdhealth community has fully funded more than 5,000 medical bills over the last 2 years. This includes accidents like a young woman in Tennessee who lost her fingers in a boating accident, to NICU babies and cancer cases. Keep in mind, Crowdhealth is not the same thing as insurance, but it is an alternative model to help pay medical bills and keep your monthly costs low. So go to Join Crowdhealth today. Use the code Lila at checkout to get your first 3 months for only $99. That's joincrowdhealth.com and use the code Lila at checkout to get your first 3 months for only $99. Joincrowdhealth.com.
And definitely not at Texas Children's Hospital. I had no idea there was a program, right? And but what he was really concerned about, the co-resident who told me, is that um, on the day of surgery, they have to do like a history and physical, right? And they usually get that history and physical from the clinic visit like a few weeks before. In that note, it said this child, right, believed she was a boy, right? For sure, definitely. That she definitely did not want to have children ever in her life. And she was positive. She wanted to commit to the more radical surgeries as she got older. But then not only was both of her parents transgender, but also every single one of this girl's siblings. So to any doctor, right, that raises immediate red flags that this child is being abused. And the reason this resident told me this is because, they were shocked, right? They couldn't believe it. And like I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it for months. It was only in the next couple of months, at the mid to late 2022 that like more people started telling me. The kids were getting younger and younger. The stories were getting crazier and crazier. But I still didn't believe it, right? Because you have the biggest children's hospital in the world lying about something like this. Like, not possible. I just didn't think it was real. But it was in January of 2023 that the directors of the program that supposedly didn't exist, right, the transgender clinic, were speaking at the hospital's most prestigious lecture series. It's called Grand Rounds. And if they're speaking at that lecture series, that means this is a hospital-wide priority. And they had laid out all these algorithms, right? Everyone in the Department of Pediatrics, the largest department of pediatrics in the world, right? Which plays a role in setting the guidelines for the rest of the country, right? They're all attending this lecture and they're talking about everything. And it's completely insane. And I see it, I'm like, all right, it's too much. It's obviously real, the program. They're obviously lying about it. So I know it's going on. So if I don't do something about it, like how can I ever call myself a doctor? Right?
Mm.
So like my wife and I had just gotten married a few months before in August of 2022. And we thought to ourselves, like, we're gonna bring children into this world. Like, what would my children think if I didn't do something about it, right? So I knew I had to, and no matter what the risks were. So I started reaching out to journalists in January of 2023, and most journalists either didn't believe me or the story was just too inflammatory for them to take it. And I can't really blame them because, it's kind of an unbelievable story. But then at the perfect possible moment, I got in touch with Christopher Rufo, like kind of mid-May 2023.
And just to catch people up until this moment, how many years had you been practicing as a doctor? And also, I wanted to ask this earlier too, but I'm sorry, I'm waiting till now to ask it. But why did you become a doctor? What was it that was motivating you to get involved with medicine?
Yeah. So my I grew up in Florida, and like the most average like Florida kid you can imagine. But my dad's a doctor. He's a pulmonary critical care. And I remember, we would go out to like the mall or a supermarket and, we would run into his patients who he would take care of in the hospital. And they would come up to him and just like thank him, like, like, oh, Dr. Haim, like, thank you for saving my life, or thank you for saving my wife or my husband or my son. And it was like this relationship between my dad and these people who I've never met. And they would like, it was like they had this whole different level of
Mm.
gratitude. And I thought, man, like, what a cool thing. Because my dad's kind of like a goofy Jewish guy, right? He's like not the coolest guy in the world. But like in the hospital, I've worked with him. I shadowed him during medical school. He's like the Fonz. He's like the coolest guy in the world. And it's because he can do these amazing things. He can like save these people. So, I saw how much my dad, like the profession meant to my dad. So it's like, I always wanted the same thing. And he always told me, it's like, you have to take care of your profession. No matter what, you have to take care of it, even when it's a hard thing to do.
So, how many years had you been practicing as a doctor when this big moment came that you finally connected with the investigative journalist Christopher Rufo that was going to finally break the story?
So at that point, it was my fourth year in residency. So I had been practicing as, practicing as a surgeon for 4 years. And I had broken the story, like I was the anonymous whistleblower during my fifth year, my last year in surgical training, 2023.
Were you worried? And I obviously want to talk about what happened, the aftermath of you blowing the whistle on these, the heinous operations at the Children's Hospital. But when you were going into that, about to break that story with Christopher, were you worried that this might be the last time I'm going to get a job? I mean, what did the calculation look like for you in terms of what you thought this might do to your future ability to practice medicine?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like a two kind of components to it, right? We knew that, because I had to make the decision with my wife. It was like a thing both of us had, like, um, so, and plus my wife is an attorney, right? She was actually a federal prosecutor. But for me and both of us, I knew that what I was worried more about was not acting, because I knew I would have to live with that for the rest of my life. So whatever would come afterwards, it didn't matter, right? Like whatever the consequences would be, they would be worth it, because this was the right thing to do, no matter what. It's my responsibility as a doctor. But then also, I was, I always knew something could happen because it was the middle of the Biden regime, right? He had been weaponizing his authority for years at that point. But since my wife is an attorney, she's brilliant, right? Like, we looked at everything that I was doing. Like, I was working at the hospital. There was nothing I had provided to Christopher Rufo that could ever be considered a violation of HIPAA. It was de-identified hospital data, right? The same thing that hospitals release to news organizations about like infectious disease outbreaks, right? All the time. So like nothing could constitute a legal violation. So, it's like, all right, we'll do it. And then, so that was the calculation, but I never had thought in a million years, what would happen after, how far it would get.
All right. So tell us the events of what happened next. Christopher Rufo breaks the story. Were you listed in the story by name? And then what were the consequences?
Yeah. So the story came out May 16th, 2023. I was the anonymous whistleblower. I just had provided documentation that showed without a doubt that Texas Children's was lying about their transgender program. And then the story was released May 16th. And then on May 17th, the Texas Senate voted to pass into law a bill that would make these transgender interventions on children illegal. And it was passed with bipartisan support, partially in response to our story coming out the day before. So within 24 hours, the conduct we exposed was made illegal. And then on May 19th, the AG announces an investigation into the hospital. And then on May 23rd, another whistleblower comes out who works inside the clinic. And this nurse tells a story about the horror going on behind closed doors. And then on May 28th, I believe, the CEO of the hospital says he's going to shut down the program for good. So at that point, like, no one knew who I was, right? I was like, all right, I'm done. This is the end of it. I just go on with my life. I was graduating the next month in June from my surgical training. I had a job lined up where I'm at currently. So I was just going to move on with my life. But then on June 23rd, 2023, like a little bit over a month after the story came out, on the day of my graduation from surgical training, right, one of the most important days of my life, two armed federal agents with Health and Human Services show up to my door like 3 hours before the ceremony, um, right before I'm about to meet with my parents. And that's when I knew that like things were getting serious. And I refused to speak with them, luckily, because my wife advised me to, like, to not speak with them, because she's an attorney. But they gave me a target letter, right? And that's just a letter saying that I'm a target of a criminal investigation by the United States Department of Justice, and it was signed by an assistant U.S. attorney, Tina Ansari. And then, yeah, we knew it was on at that point.
WeHeartNutrition.com is a vitamin and supplement company that provides the highest quality, researched back ingredients, customized and optimized to help you be healthy. What I also love about We Heart Nutrition is that this is a family-owned company, and they donate a full 10% back of all of their revenue to pregnancy resource centers to help moms and babies in need. So whether you are premenopausal or postmenopausal, whether you're looking to conceive, help improve your fertility, whether you're pregnant, and this is a great prenatal vitamin, or you're postnatal. Plus, I'm very excited to share this with my husband. Now We Heart Nutrition has come out with their first line of men's vitamins. And if you order today at WeHeartNutrition.com, get your vitamins, you can get 20% off using the code Lila. And if you spend at least $50, you will get a free signature bamboo capsule vitamin box. So go to WeHeartNutrition.com today. Use the code Lila at checkout to get 20% off your purchase. That's WeHeartNutrition.com. That is so wild. And so they're armed federal agents at your door to give you a notice that you're under criminal investigation by the DOJ. And you're like getting ready to go out for, get graduated and go off for lunch. I mean, thank goodness that your wife is you said she's a federal prosecutor. Did I hear that right? That's pretty,
she had just been hired as a federal
providential.
prosecutor at the time. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty providential because, that sounds like an intimidation tactic to me.
Oh yeah. And that's only just the beginning. I mean, my wife being a federal prosecutor plays a big role in what happened like the next month.
Okay, so tell us what happens next.
Yeah. So, we go to the graduation, we knew we had to fight back. So we have the best time we can possibly have, given the circumstances. We get in touch with a really amazing legal team. And we reach out to Tina Ansari, the federal prosecutor who had sent the agents to my home. So, the first thing we had to do was and I was still anonymous at the time, and I stayed anonymous for the next 6 months, but my attorneys reach out to Tina Ansari and, because they wanted to have a conversation to discuss what was going on. And after Tina Ansari misses a couple of meetings, right? And the whole reason was to like drive up legal bills for me, right? During the first conversation, my attorneys find out, and we find out that this lady, Tina Ansari, is a complete lunatic, right? She tells my attorneys on that first phone call, and all of this is outlined in a letter my attorney sent to Congress. So it's not just me saying this. This is like documented. It's in congressional record. The first conversation in July of 2023, a month after agents were sent to my home, she admits to my attorneys that she never even reviewed the evidence before sending agents to my home. She had no idea what she was investigating, right? She thought I had released patient names, which if you just looked at the information, you would know is completely untrue. But during that first phone call too, even though she didn't do any research into what she was investigating, she did enough research to find out my wife had just been hired as a federal prosecutor, and tells my attorneys that, Andrea, my wife, isn't going to have any problems with her background check unless she continues to become difficult, right?
Wow.
And what she was referring, and that's quoted in the letter. And what she was referring to is, right, if we start causing problems, she's going to go to the U.S. attorney in Dallas, right, where my wife was just hired, and maybe introduce some problems. So, like, we were being blackmailed, right? Both on the day of my graduation and my wife's just being hired at this position. She was using the value of our greatest accomplishments as the means to to obtain like our compliance with this corrupt investigation. Like, it was her means of extortion. And it was completely insane.
So were the charges, that is insane. Were the charges that you had released, you had violated HIPAA, that you had released patient names, even though there was zero evidence for that and it's simply not true? Was that what this entire thing was based on in the end?
Yeah, yeah. So during this point in July of 2023, and over the next really 6 months, my attorneys have a couple conversations with Tina Ansari. No charges yet. And they kind of go back and forth, and every single call it gets worse and worse. She just wanted me to plead to something, to apologize. They wanted to make me into to just make me into an example, right? They were trying to intimidate me. There was one phone call in October of 2023 that she said she was going to take me to a jury trial, even if she was going to lose, even on technicality, right? And it was at that point that I knew I had to take this story public, right? And that's when I took the story public in January of 2024. But the charges only came until June of that year, so 6 months after. And the charges were really remarkable because the evolution of the charges are really what reveals the true nature of this indictment.
Mm.
Because when you look at the first indictment, they had charged me with disclosure of patient information in order to harm patients, right? Classic HIPAA statute, right? You know, this statement goes out into, on the DOJ's website, which accuses me of all these things where they're claiming I disclosed patient information and I was harming patients, and makes me look really really bad. And of course these big liberal outlets have like kind of latch on to this, and it's makes me look very bad. But like when we get the indictment, I read it and I knew every single thing they accused me of was completely false. It only took us a few weeks to prove that what the DOJ was charging me with in their first indictment was completely disproven by the DOJ's own evidence. So and it's worth restating, the evidence they gave us in discovery disproved all of their allegations, right? So which means they either never looked at their evidence or they intentionally ignored it. I believe the latter is more likely. So the first indictment falls apart, and then over the next couple of months, the true nature of their prosecution really reveals itself.
I mean, it sounds like a dyed in the wool case of lawfare. I mean, they're literally weaponizing the DOJ and the system against you, and for what, right? I mean, this was, like you said, the Biden administration, and I want to get to the politics of it more in a minute. But just to be clear about what you guys were experiencing during this time, what kind of cost did this have for you and your wife? Do you now have to hire a legal team, start to deal with a criminal investigation, and now a trial against yourself?
Yeah. So at the very beginning, when the agents first came to my home on the day of my graduation, both my wife and I are very like, we don't really spend a lot of money. We had saved up like $250,000. We were hoping to like buy a home and kind of, create a future for ourselves. We had blown through all of that in like 3 months, 4 months, right? And that's how expensive these things get. So by the time I took my story public in January of 2024, we had like maybe a couple $100 to our name, nothing, zero. And we knew that like Ansari told us that she was going to take me to trial, and like, so I knew I had to do something. Um, and when the indictment first came out, it's like the amount of legal costs, this can be tens of thousands of dollars every single day. So the total cost was probably a little bit over $2 million. And we had raised $1.3 million. So we're still like far in the hole. I mean, we're still like totally broke. We have like $4,000. And this is an attorney and a surgeon, right? So we're pretty broke. But and during those first couple months, just an unimaginable amount of fear about is it even possible that we can win this? Because the DOJ just proved to be completely persistent. Even after all of their arguments failed, they just kept on going. Like after we lost all of our money, like there was a certain point where like we had no resources left. We were running on completely empty.
I mean, it's terrifying too that what you experienced could, under a corrupt government, happen to anyone because you were in the crosshairs of their ideology. You were standing against their ideology. What was going on, if you can speak to the agenda at that time of the Biden administration? Like, give us a little bit of memory lane here in terms of what kind of political powers you were up against and the ideologies that you were up against.
Yeah. So just to kind of list off a couple things, um, a couple of days after the agents were sent to my home initially, find out that they had got a warrant for my emails, for my phone, for everything. So they were like surveilling me, listening to everything. You know, someone had started posting these reviews about me online, right? Accusing me of sexually abusing patients behind closed doors, like in clinics and like in mutilating patients. And we know now that that came from TCH, and so the government had leaked my name to them. You know, the person who did this had admitted to an FBI agent. We have that in discovery. We know that for a fact, right? And the day after I was indicted, the FBI and like the DOJ had issued this guidance on targeting whistleblowers or like people who challenge the transgender interventions in hospitals. HHS, the director of the Office of Civil Rights, had mentioned my case specifically, and they had been behind targeting me. We were up against these most powerful organizations in human history, right? With the most powerful law enforcement agencies, the most powerful propaganda machine, the greatest amount of resources. And then it was us. It was like me, my wife, and my attorneys. And we had our first baby during all of this, in the middle of all of it. My wife had an emergency C-section, and even I had to leave like an hour after the baby was born while my wife was in post-op at the hospital I work at here because I had to go to court the next day. And it's like that's what we were up against. But it wasn't only like the prosecutors, it was the entire legal system, because it was the judge and everyone else who were committed to my destruction.
GoodRanchers.com is American meat delivered, and I absolutely love it. We get this meat, chicken, poultry products every month to our family home, and it's delicious. We love the steaks. We love the chicken. We love the seed oil-free chicken nuggets. What's so amazing about GoodRanchers.com is that it's 100% sourced from ranchers and farms in the United States, the good old USA. That means that 100% transparency where your meat is coming from. Did you know that 85% of the meat that's in your grocery store, even if it says product of the USA on it, is not from the USA? It's actually imported in. And because of tariffs and other politics, who knows what's going to happen with the meat prices at the grocery store. And that's why GoodRanchers.com has got you covered. And if you go to GoodRanchers.com today, you can get a lifetime of free add-ons in your subscription box. That means you can get a free add-on of bacon, wild-caught salmon, beef, or my favorite, the seed oil-free chicken nuggets, as well as a full $40 off and fast and free shipping by using the code Lila. That's goodranchers.com. Make your order today and use the code Lila. Do you have, Dr. Haim, any legal recourse at this point where you can, well, first wrap us up. Tell us how this concluded, right? And then tell us if there have been any opportunities for a legal response that you could levy against what is a clear abuse of the legal system by the DOJ and by this particular prosecutor.
The story of how it ends is really remarkable and really kind of provides insight into what this case was all about. So it's worth going into a little bit, but so the first indictment falls apart, right? Because everything they accused me of was completely fabricated. The DOJ even acknowledged that what they accused me of, they present false information to a grand jury. So they get a second indictment, but they make a couple of significant changes. They change the word disclose, which is like the operative language of HIPAA, right? To use. So they're not saying I disclosed anything. They're saying I used it. The problem with use is that use is not a crime. That's not even in the criminal statute, right? It's just a really, really big deal. They also changed the victims, which is very, very important. In the first indictment, it was TCH and his patients, right? Makes sense, right? With HIPAA, it's patient privacy, like you release information to harm patients. In the second indictment, it's TCH and its physicians. So it was the first time in American history that HIPAA was being used to not protect patient privacy, but rather corrupt multi-billion-dollar hospital systems and the doctors who were caught lying to the public, right?
Mm.
So, we go through some legal battles for the second indictment. And the second indictment was dead in the water because they also included, they forgot to proofread their indictment. Instead of subchapter XI, they wrote subchapter XL. The problem is subchapter XL doesn't exist, so it's legally like non-binding, right?
It's wild.
So at the same time too, right, the victims are TCH and his physicians, Baylor College of Medicine. I find out, right, through going down like this very, very deep rabbit hole, that the lead prosecutor, Tina Ansari, who had been torturing me and my family for the past year, right, has the most significant conflicts of interest with the victims in her indictment, TCH and Baylor College of Medicine, right? Right after she sent agents to my home, like her brother, who owns a coffee company which has contracts with hospitals within the academic consortium, right? He starts going to major fundraisers with the president of TCH, right? Her uncle was formerly on the board of TCH. Her aunt is a major fundraiser for TCH and Baylor College of Medicine and a prominent Democrat in Houston. She ran against Dan Crenshaw, and she's a radical LGBT and transgender activist. And she was appointed to the board of one of the hospitals in the academic consortium right after she sent agents to my home. At the same time as TCH's vice president and general counsel, who was at the very first meeting when agents were sent to my home. So, of course, the we once we disclosed this to the DOJ about these remarkable conflicts of interest, she withdraws herself from the case. Doesn't say why, just withdraws herself from the case. And the second indictment falls apart. But then they get a third indictment, right? Didn't think it was possible, but they get a third indictment. And on the same day as their indictment, they file a motion for a gag order, right? And this is for someone who's never been recognized publicly, right? Like, you gag orders are for people who have the ability to like, sway a jury. And and at that point we had no money, and the judge had just threatened. We had a hearing for it. Instead of granting the gag order, right? The judge knew if he granted it, he would become the laughing stock of like the legal world, because for someone like me, it's insane to do it. He just threatens to send me to jail if I continue to speak out, right? And at that point, I had no recourse. That was December 3rd, 2024, which was the darkest time of the whole thing. And over the next, month and a half, going up until Trump's inauguration, it was like the darkest time of my entire life because everything I had was taken away from me, right? Where like the DOJ was escalating the case behind closed doors. And the only reason I was able to fight back to raise money for a legal defense was by speaking out. And that was taken away from me, right? So, because at that point, I didn't have an option but to comply because they were going to send me to jail. But then after Trump's inauguration, after he signs the weaponization executive order, I decided to speak out because that's when they really started escalating the case. And every day they escalated, that's like tens of thousands of dollars towards this trial. And by that point, I knew the judge was so corrupt. He was so in bed with the prosecution, right? That if I go to trial, he's going to withdraw the ability for me to defend myself because he has the ability to preclude me from making a whistleblower defense. And that's what the DOJ was trying to do. So I speak out on January 22nd, 2025, after Trump's inauguration. And we get word a day later, on Thursday, January 23rd, that the judge is going to send me to jail the next day, right? He's going to sign an arrest warrant.
And just to be clear, what was the pretense of this potential arrest warrant? What
For
would
me,
yeah.
so I spoke out on X, right?
Okay.
I had not spoken out about the case since the whole gag order hearing a month before December 3rd, right? Because a judge had threatened to send me to jail.
It's wild.
So yeah, and
So
this is
you
where
had posted on X about what you were enduring, the
yeah,
lawfare
and that
against you.
exactly, yeah. And so
And
then
and
so
and also that and this was the way you were also raising money for your legal defense because they had
yeah,
basically drained all of your savings. So the only way you could hire attorneys to competently deal with this lawfare was to get the public interest involved, and they got involved. A lot of people were really disturbed by what was happening to you, but the judge said you're not allowed to do that anymore. And if you do that, you go right to jail. I mean, that
yeah,
was the
yeah,
the
yeah,
position. It's absolutely
yeah.
insane.
The DOJ's argument was they were concerned about cyberbullying. No joke, that's what they wrote in the motion. Yeah.
Against who?
Yeah, yeah, against them. Yeah, they were
Against
worried that
them.
they were being cyberbullied. Yeah.
Wow.
So 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 it was January 23rd. It was a Thursday, if I remember correctly. And after I spoke out the day before, because we were calling out the DOJ, the judge, everyone, right? It was my first time speaking out since the month before that. And we get a call that evening from my attorneys. We had heard things were really going south, that the judge was very angry. But then it was that evening that we hear that, you know, the judge is ready to sign a warrant for your arrest the next day, right? So you can be arrested the next day. Also, your trial is going to be moved up an entire month. It's going to start on Monday. So you're going to be in jail. You're going to go to trial on Monday, unless the way I get out of it, right? The deal that was proposed to my attorneys and myself is that I have to sign an agreement with the DOJ, right? And if I sign that agreement, then everything goes away, right? So, I was going to violate that agreement the following Monday because I had patients to operate on the next day because the agreement
And the
said,
oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, the agreement said I couldn't sue the government. I couldn't disparage the government. I couldn't disparage TCH or Baylor College of Medicine, but also no one in my family could disparage TCH, Baylor College of Medicine, or the government because my wife had been speaking out at the time after the gag order for me. So, but signing this deal, you know, didn't necessarily guarantee that I wasn't being arrested. So I'm like, okay, whatever, right? I'll sign this thing. I'm going to violate it on Monday. It doesn't matter because it's being done under duress. It's completely illegal for a judge to threaten a defendant, right? To sign an agreement, right? In order for the judge to just make a case go away because the judge was being embarrassed at the time, right? The DOJ was being embarrassed. They just wanted this case to go away. So, but that's when that evening too was when every single person I had met over the past year through like telling the story to all these different people, we kind of use all the social capital we had. We text every single person we knew. So there was like this flurry of activity going on in the background with people trying to advocate for us. The only way that agreement didn't go into place and I didn't go to jail was if the DOJ in DC had issued guidance to the Southern District where the case was being tried to drop if they dropped the case with prejudice, right? So and then the next day, I thought I was going to jail. I went and operated on my patients, not knowing if I was going to be arrested that day. And then, later that day, we find out that the case is dismissed with prejudice, that the DOJ actually came through, and that, like, overcoming the greatest odds possible, you know, um, we spoke out against this judge thinking he was going to send us to jail, but, we had been backed into a corner. And at the last possible moment, at facing the greatest odds, you know, um, uh, I became a free man. It's amazing.
What was the experience like when you found out that the DOJ, again, under the Trump administration, so this would have, who knows what would have happened under a Harris administration? I do want to ask you about your theory on that. But what was it like to find out that there had been an intervention, that the case was dropped with prejudice, and that now you would no longer deal with that lawfare anymore?
Yeah, and so it was remarkable because of one of those moments that's like crystallized in my mind for the rest of my life. Like I remember where I was standing, what I was wearing, like which way I was looking, and My wife was in our living room. I was in our bedroom talking to someone, and I just hear my wife kind of scream, and I thought it was either really bad or really good. It's either like the cops just showed up or like maybe something good happens. And she comes in, she's smiling, and I'm like, man, like that's good. That's good news, like this is maybe. And then she tells me that the case is dropped. It's dropped with prejudice, and which means they can never bring it again. And she was holding our baby, you know,
Mm.
um, and yeah, so it was something that yeah, we just held each other, and that was it. It was over. It was over at that moment. Yeah.
Well, I'm so uh, grateful and glad that you are not enduring that. I mean, I think it's wild to people listening. I'm sure everyone listening is like, it's wild to people listening that this could happen in a country that prides itself on rule of law, and that we have a system that is not, some third world corrupt system, but that people ultimately operate with justice. I mean, I think there's a sense of safety that many people feel, at least to some degree. And what you went through is absolutely horrific. Do you have a few? I mean, there's a few questions. Number one, in the aftermath, is there recourse for you now to sue the people that did this to you
You
and the
know,
harm that
it's
they caused you?
if there's one thing I've discovered during this whole process is that the way the system is now for people like me, for like, you know, conservatives, right, who get prosecuted by the Department of Justice, or even the average person, right? The system is designed to indemnify and protect the system from any accountability. So, for me to go back and sue the government, right, for any type of violation of their duty, right, for essentially fabricating a case against me, all their evidence, proving I was innocent, but somehow they just manufactured a case against me, right? Try to send me to prison for 10 years, right? That they could do this to anyone too, right? They can manufacture a case against anyone. And so if I have to sue the government, right, that takes money. We have no money, right? And the chance of that winning, right, is very low because, which court does it have to go through? It has to go through the court that the case was tried in, which was Judge Hittner, the same guy who gagged me and was trying to send me to jail, right? So no, there's no recourse. I mean, it's a lot of squeeze, not a lot of juice, right? And when you have people like me who have no money, and then also it's like, there's not like on the criminal side, there's not like a ecosystem on the conservative side for
Mm.
organizations to assist. And like, I'm not begrudging it, it's just a reality. It's like, it is what it is. I mean, it's unfortunate, but you know and then so we'll probably be paying legal bills with Social Security. It is what it is. If
I mean,
anyone wants to donate, it's givesendgo.com forward
I was
slash
going to say,
Texas underscore
we will
whistleblower.
definitely thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Haim, we're going to definitely link that. I mean, it's madness, and it's also, it is crazy to think that we don't have, pro bono legal groups that are lined up to support people who are fighting these terrors. Quite frankly, I mean, some of it exists, for First Amendment, protections, groups that I'm familiar with, like Alliance Defending Freedom, right, or Thomas More Society, that are working on the pro-life cause, or pro-marriage cause, things like that. But in terms of this new thing that's just really happened in our culture in the last decade or less, where transgender ideology has become more mainstream, and now you have, kids undergoing sex change surgeries.
Yeah.
Wild, right? Have you been in
Yeah.
touch with any public interest groups or pro bono legal firms or lawyers that have expressed support? You mentioned there doesn't seem to be much of an ecosystem in the conservative space. What have you discovered, if anything?
Yeah, so ADF, I have to say, has they were with us from the very beginning, but and they were able to help us out at a time when it really mattered, and because they're they're like a civil side. They do First Amendment stuff, they do abortion issues, but they're not designed, like their mandate based on their donations and their organization is not made for criminal cases. But the people at ADF are such good people that they really bent over backwards to help us out in the very beginning. But still, with that, it's and they were amazing. But it was for me in this situation, they couldn't have done more because like their organization is designed for something else.
Right.
And but they were the only ones who helped us out, like in terms
Mm.
of financial assistance, and but what I realized is that like the only people on the conservative side who uh you know it was the average people who put us through. Like we got through our case. We raised $1.3 million by $5 and $10 donations, right? Like we didn't have big donors. I can't tell you the number of times that I talked to big conservative donors, right? They would say all these great things. They would say, "Oh, let's have a dinner. We'll help you with your legal defense and whatever." Like I had no, I expect nothing from them, right? Like I had no claim to to um to their charity, right? None. But especially when they would express certain things to me. And then of course every single time, the next day, don't even call, don't even respond text messages, right? Nothing. And that's just how it was for, 2 years. Except for a very, very select few. But and and compare that to the other side. Not only like in my case, like in conservative cases in general, and this is a reality, right?
Mm.
Um, the big white collar law firms, which are critical for white collar like criminal defense, like they won't even represent me, right? They wouldn't even take my case. A bunch of the attorneys, like they wouldn't even think about taking my case, like even if I could pay them, right? So if you kill someone, like think about Luigi Mangione, right? You'll have a million law firms which are lining up around the block to represent that guy. I mean, all the biggest law firms in the country. And in my case, the big law firms actually had actively interfered, right? Had affected the quality of the defense in my case, right? By doing certain things. I can't necessarily get into the specifics, but these big law firms had played a role in trying to uh, um, prevent the most robust legal defense in my situation.
Are you saying when you're saying there are these kind of white collar legal firms that were, potentially would have damaged or were damaging your legal defense? Are you saying there were actually some attorneys that you were working with that you felt were effectively sabotaging your case, or you're saying you wouldn't have trusted them to, give the best case, defend you the best that they could?
So the attorneys I worked with it was the greatest legal team in the country. I mean, it was like this team that was like put together by Providence, like truly. But
Mm.
the firms, right? Uh, the
I
firms,
see.
um, you know, they can do certain things to make sure that certain people will do certain things that might affect the defense, right? And that's very terrifying, right? Because these big law firms they rely on clients that especially these big clients that have institutional power. If they know that someone from their firm's representing someone like me, right, those firms will be punished for it by these clients. So yeah, it's
It's
a
wild.
very, very nefarious process. And it's not just me. I mean,
Mm.
this story is replicated in every other political case over the past during the Biden regime.
It's wild.
The funny thing is, the other TCH whistleblower, Vanessa Sivich, she actually went story public with a story that is even more wild. The day out, of my first arraignment, and she actually started a nonprofit. It's called Protecting Texas Children's. I'm on the board of that, so I'm just playing an ancillary role, but I actually feel
Yeah.
confident. There's organizations kind of in the development now on the conservative side that I believe are going to serve that role, and I think ADF is going to move in that direction.
Mm.
America First Legal, there's a bunch of other ones that are really, really good. I mean, because you really do, especially ADF, like these are, I mean, I really can't say enough about ADF. I mean, it's like such an amazing
They are
organization.
amazing.
I feel confident that them and then even like EPPC with Ron Anderson. I don't know if you know
Mm.
him.
Yes,
Uh,
another amazing group. Big fan.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you have these people who, like, especially those guys, like Ryan Anderson, he was with us from the very beginning. Those guys are amazing. Like, and then Heritage too. You have people who, they understand there's a need and they're working. I believe that they're working towards that need. And they're, I have enough confidence that the right people are in the right positions that they'll start working towards it.
You were just invited to Congress, I think last month, in the last month, where you gave your testimony about what happened and what
Yes.
happened to you. Tell me about how that went.
Yeah. It was probably the most, you know, surreal, wild experience of my entire life. Of a whole series of very surreal and wild experiences. Because uh yeah, I was invited to Congress with the Weaponization Committee. Jim Jordan, Chip Roy, and we had a hearing, right? Like the hearings you see online. And we were telling a story about what happened to us. It was me, Vanessa Savage, the other whistleblower, and my attorney, Mark Lytle. And it was with the Democrats, so it was a very, very contentious. I mean, we went to war during that hearing. But I'll tell you what, I mean, it was one of the greatest times I've ever had in my life because going up against these Democrats was like playing basketball against a bunch of first graders. I mean, I mean, it was just too easy to um, you know, what these people were going to say was so predictable. I kind of had prepared like my statement and then, everything. And you could tell that these people just had no idea what they were talking about. But it was a certain degree of vindication because you know you suffer so much. You just want to be able to tell this story, but also confront the people who did this and the Democrats who sat on that committee. Right? They were part of it, and it was great to go head to head with them, but also to tell the story to the Republicans, the people who may actually be in a position to do something about it.
Do you think that there is legislation that Congress could pass to, as you say, do something about this and prevent it from ever happening again?
Actually, I think it's much easier. All you have to do, there's existing criminal statutes that criminalize this type of corruption. Like it's very clear, right? You can't prosecute people, right, because they're your political opponents. You definitely can't prosecute people when your family stands to benefit financially from it. And you can't prosecute people when you ignore evidence of their innocence, which all three of these, I believe, are very much pertinent, right? So all that has to happen is the Department of Justice has to investigate this case as it really is.
Mm.
As you had prosecutors who were weaponizing their authority in order to destroy their political targets, in order to advance their own careers, in order to advance the stature of their family within this hierarchy of like Houston high society. So it's much easier than that. We don't need new legislation. We don't need anything like that. We simply need prosecutors the in Texas's Southern District of Texas, which is now run by someone who was, I believe, chief of staff for Ted Cruz. I think his last name is Ganji, right? All these people have to do
Mm.
is do their job.
Are you hopeful that that's going to happen under this administration?
Eh, you know, it's the the one thing I've given up, you know, I no longer hope when it comes to other people, right?
Mm.
I don't have hope in other people. I maybe a part of me does. The only thing I can hope for is my own capacity to achieve certain results because that's what I found. Is like, me and the help of other people. Like I no way I could have done any of this on my own, right? It's only by like the faith of other people and willing to work with me and assist me. But like there are certain things that I'm pursuing now, right? Because like the nature of what these people did is very clear. If certain information is exposed to the right people, there's no option but to prosecute it, right? Because the way that they manufactured this crime, there's a very long paper trail behind it. A paper trail I can actually do something to help
Mm.
uncover. Because I was the one who uncovered the conflicts, right? Like if I can do that, then I can uncover this paper trail which revealed that these people knew they lied, which kind of had contributed to the prosecution in the first place.
Dr. Haim, why do you think that there is so much groupthink and, quite frankly, corruption, as you've just detailed? It's very chilling, right? Why do you think there is so much groupthink and corruption around defending this transgender ideology and the practice, the heinous practice of giving sex changes and puberty blockers to children?
You know, I spent, I mean, I can't even tell you how much time thinking about that very question. I mean, it's like an inordinate amount of time because so much of it has to do with this case, right? Like where so many people just go along with it and even the prosecution and everything else. And um I think that why do I think there's so much groupthink? And the reason is because I think that is the natural state of human existence. Like that is the rule, not the exception. And that's, you see that all throughout history. Whenever you have powerful institutions, right, that combine themselves with powerful ideologies, that combine themselves with powerful resources in terms of media, and then they embed themselves into the education system and everything else, then humans are naturally designed to just go along with it, right? To be a part of the group. And even if that means doing what they know to be wrong,
Mm.
the exception is always, average people standing up against it. And I think that the reason is because that's hard. It's hard, but like, I'm a testament to it. Like, you know, I would do everything over again. And there's nothing I regret. I mean, all the pain and suffering, like the $1 million in legal debt is nothing compared to being able to look at my daughter, right? And to have her smile and to think to myself, like, man, like, you know, um, we did the right thing. Like she can grow up and think to herself, like, I can look at my father and that's an example to live up to, just like I could look at my dad and live up to his example, right? And that's I can live in a trailer. We can raise our children in a trailer, right? Not bashing trailers, you know, it's not I don't mean to do that, but uh yeah, my grandparents lived in tents when they first moved to Israel, right? My grandmother
Mm.
couldn't read, but
Mm.
they raised a good family. You can live poorly. You can sacrifice material wealth
Mm.
on this earth in order to follow God's providence.
Mm.
Because if you do that, like there's nothing that they can take away from you.
Mm. That's beautiful. I'm sure she will be very proud of you when she's old enough to learn what you guys went through for the sake of her future, as well as the rest of the children in this country and beyond, their futures. What do you think, Dr. Haim, we can do to prevent this from happening to whistleblowers in the future, and to, quite frankly, reform the system, take some action to solve, the corruption that exists, so that this larger problem's a problem of corruption, because it happened to you, it could happen to somebody else, it happened to you on this particular issue, but it could happen to people on other issues too. I mean, I'm in the pro-life space, and federal agents showed up at the homes of pro-life activists who were praying outside abortion clinics to scare them and drag them off in chains. I mean, with handcuffs on. So this is something that the political representation is happening on other issues that the left favors, and when they have power, they've weaponized it against people that stood up within their legal rights to speak out. What do you think we can do? What would be, I'm sure you've thought about that a lot as well,
Oh yeah,
as
yeah.
everything else.
It's like the broken window theory of crime prevention, right? All you have to do is make sure that people aren't breaking windows. It's a simple thing, right? And if people see that the effort is being made to hold a certain number of people accountable for certain crimes, then most of the rest of them will fall in line. And I hope that's what the case would be. So the most egregious cases, like this one, where it's very clear and there's a very deep paper trail to demonstrate the corruption. All the DOJ has to do is make an example out of them, right? To criminally investigate them, right? Prosecute them if they believe a crime is present, right? Only if they believe it, right? They have to apply the same rigor, right? Just like in any legitimate case, like, because the last thing I would ever want to be done to them is to go through the same thing I did.
Mm.
If they get if they get investigated and prosecuted, they deserve a fair trial. And if the evidence in front of a jury shows that these people are guilty of a crime, then they should be held accountable. So that's what I believe, and I believe that
And
if
and and not to interrupt, but that would be the attorney, the prosecutor, and sorry, as well as the judge. You think that those were the worst offenders in your view?
Yeah, I mean, the judge. I mean, it's the amount of corruption on the judge's side. Like what he did is just blatantly illegal. It's not even like a question, right? Like he was extorting me, right? Not only the gag order thing was crazy enough, right? But I mean, the judge a year before he had overturned a Texas law SB 12, which would make it illegal for children to attend these drag shows. Where like during the hearing, right, the plaintiffs, the ACLU, would talk about how children might be exposed to nudity, where the children could potentially grab the breasts and the butts of these drag performers, and the judge actually let one of the drag performers twerk in the courtroom. Like it's sick,
Wild.
right? So that's who this judge is, right? And he was extorting me the day before the case. He dismissed the case, right?
It's
Threatening to send
wild.
me to jail, to move my trial up an entire month, prevent me from having any type of legitimate case, right? Like a fair trial, and then essentially compelling me to sign an agreement I would have never signed, right? Because I would never sign that agreement. The only reason I signed it is because I had to operate on patients the next day, like and like um uh and that was like really important, right? And I wanted to give the DOJ and DC the very slim chance. I didn't think they were going to follow through, but like they did. But yeah, so it'd be but also this goes back because the case was only able to happen because what I believe are people within TCH and Baylor College of Medicine who were able to make it happen. Because you see that like for example, right? To give you an example of how much corruption there was on that side. At the very first meeting before agents came to my home, it was 4 days before the agents showed up to my door. It was June 19th. That's the first meeting that um, the HHS agents had with like TCH and Baylor College of Medicine. One of the people at that meeting was Afshin Davis, TCH general counsel, who then got appointed to the board with Tina's aunt 2 months later to another hospital within the Baylor TCH consortium. But another person, TCH and Baylor counsel at that meeting was someone by the name of Gregory Sakin, right? This is a partner at a law firm called Baker Hofstetler. And the really interesting thing about that is my wife was working at Baker Hofstetler at the time in Houston, right? She was associate there. And not only did she know Gregory Sakin, right? They were personally familiar with each other. They had talked on the phone for a very long time right before agents came to my home. So why was it that how did Tina Ansari know that my wife had just been hired as a DOJ attorney? Well, maybe because Gregory Sakin, this is my belief that maybe Gregory Sakin, because the conversation Sakin had with my wife was about my wife being hired at the DOJ, right? Because Sakin used to work in the Southern District of Texas, right? In the same unit that Tina Ansari works in. So that's
It's
why my
wild.
wife was talking to him because someone at the firm was like, "Oh, you should talk to Gregory Sakin. He was a former assistant U.S. attorney." So like you're about to go into it, he was in that office in that position like years ago. So you can have perspective.
Mm. I
And
mean, it
what's really
sounds.
weird is during that conversation, Gregory Sakin was like, "Oh yeah, like my wife told we only just remembered this like 2 weeks ago." He was saying that um these DOJ prosecutors, they're very corrupt, right? That like they go after prosecutions that are too aggressive. They try to send innocent people to prison, and isn't that odd? That's only a little bit after that conversation that he's part of a meeting that initiates the entire process that leads to my eventual prosecution trying to send me to prison for 10 years based on the most corrupt legal case in the history of HIPAA and maybe the history of this country.
It's wild. Well,
Yeah.
what's so wild is that it's like this, a nod and a wink to each other of, okay, we're going to protect this ideology, right? We're going to protect transing the kids ultimately. And we're going to use whatever power we have illegitimately or legitimately to protect this ideology. And so everyone else, if you're in my way, you're just in my way. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really, that's
And
really
just
what's going on.
to circle out this entire like process, like this kind of like cyclone of corruption is like, and at that first meeting too, who was their primary witness? The worst possible witness, any type of investigation or prosecution could have ever had. It was someone who's never even met me before, who was least likely to know the details of the case. The TCH chief of surgery, a guy by the name of Larry Ollier, right? And who is Larry Ollier, right? Someone who has a very distinct financial interest in TCH, whose wife also just happens to be a radical abortion and transgender activist, right? It's like, um, you know, when you can't, when you don't think it can possibly get worse, right? It just gets worse. Like how the perfect witness to give them exactly what they need to initiate this investigation, but he was also their primary witness for the prosecution, right? But everything that the DOJ's own evidence showed was that everything he said was false. And it's my belief that he knew he was lying, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and anyone in the system, in this academic surgery system, knows that there's a huge paper trail to show that what this guy was telling these federal law enforcement authorities was completely bogus, of course. But why would HHS and all these people not go to the general surgeons? Why'd they go to the chief of surgery who's a plastic surgeon, right? And I know they didn't go to the general surgeons because I was with all the general surgeons the night of my graduation. And they know, like everything was totally kosher, like totally normal, you know? The only person they talked to was a TCH, or what I believe, the only person they talked to was a TCH chief of surgery, who was least likely to know what was going on, but also the most likely to know given his situation.
Wow. So someone that they thought that they could use illegitimately, ultimately, whether he's testifying and intentionally lying or he's pretending he knows because it's convenient to have a certain pattern of facts. But either way, he was someone that obviously had misinformation, but he was someone that wasn't a friend or someone that wasn't a colleague directly with you. It's not like someone that you could trust. It was someone that they could trust. And that was who they selected in the end.
Yeah, and if your viewers find this, or listeners find these assertions to be pretty, uh, um, like inflammatory, like they're big statements, right? Like all this, like there's unsealed evidence from our case that shows this, right?
Mm.
That showed that everything he told them is a complete, like that was not true, right? That he admits that he never knew me, right? The the DOJ's own evidence is unsealed that shows they knew all along, or should have known all along, that what they were charging me with was completely false, right? So this is not like just me saying this. All this is public, right? You can look at
Wow.
the evidence. It's like as clear as day. But the DOJ themselves had acknowledged that they know it, that they presented false information to a grand jury. They said that themselves in a motion October of 2024, but they just said they didn't do so knowingly, right? So they just didn't look at their evidence. Is that the case, right? So they find the best witness at the perfect moment, and then they find the best prosecutor at the perfect moment, right? Tina Ansari, who
Mm.
just so happens to have all these connections with TCH and Baylor College of Medicine's leadership. How does she know who the best witness is going to be, right? Well, maybe because she knows all the leadership there, right? And then, like, how is it that the other people at that meeting, June 19th, right? Gregory Sakin and Afshin Davis, the counsel, their job in those meetings is to prevent their client, Larry Ollier, from saying something ridiculous in front of a law enforcement agent, doing something like really bad, like lying to people. But somehow they crap the bed, right? They let their client, Larry Ollier, present complete false information to law enforcement agencies, not only to HHS, but also to the FBI, right? They just somehow messed up really bad, you know? And like, is this sequence of events so, remarkable at this point in June of 2023 and after, when the entire Biden administration is being weaponized to prosecute their political opponents? No, I mean, this is like completely standard. This is like run in the mill third world corruption. But for us, it's just new because we've never dealt with it before. But like,
Wow.
this is like, you know, it's very sad once you make that realization that this is like nothing really remarkable about this, just like standard corruption.
Well, I applaud you for being willing to speak and speaking out again and again, and also for fighting it, because I do think there is good people would have a tendency to say, okay, this is a lot of heat. I can't handle it. I've got bills to pay. I've got a family to feed. I've got a future. And I'll just tell them I won't do this anymore. I won't speak out, or I'll tell them that I'm sorry. There was some mistake. I must have accidentally did something wrong. Not that I really did, but just make this go away, basically. And the fact that you have been consistent, like your integrity throughout this, I think is so tremendously admirable. And I do think that an example needs to be made in your case. It's so blatant, the corruption. And I'm hopeful that we will see something with the current DOJ. And I think the posture that it's taken to undoing corruption and fighting back against the extremes of the left. I mean, this seems like the perfect case for them to take.
Yeah, and all they have to do is unseal. There's a protective order to all the evidence in the case. They have to unseal that order so we can look at the evidence. Because there's even evidence that like I haven't looked at carefully, because there's so much that details like how this whole thing was constructed. But also in that evidence, it shows who was accusing me of like sexually abusing patients. I know who the person is, right? But like, I can't say because it's under a protective order. But like, these people did this to me, right? They tried to take everything away from me. And like, they knew this. They, like, the FBI knew this, that these people
That
were
could be
doing
a
this.
civil suit, right, Dr. Haim? To
It's too
just
late. It's too late
it's
because it's past the year of, and that's what sucks so much, because it's like, that's how they do it, right? That's how they do it, because
is there a
when they were,
year statute of limitations in
yeah,
Texas for
so they were,
civil suits?
and because I have the reviews, we had, when I was still anonymous, we knew that this was coming from TCH, so we hired a bunch of Navy SEALs, ex-Navy SEALs who were like tech guys to do like an investigation. And then we also subpoenaed WebMD, and we got the IP addresses. All the IP addresses were coming from the same person, right?
Wow.
So, we were able to show, and now once we got the discovery, we knew it was the same person. But by the time that came around, it was the middle of the case, so the statute of limitations had already passed. So it's like, and what the review was it was like per se defamation. They were accusing me of a crime, right? A crime they knew was false, and this person is someone who knew me, you know.
It's wild.
Yeah.
What is next for you and your family? You've got this amazing wife, warrior wife. You're a warrior. You've got a beautiful little one now. What do you see your future like?
It's I think it's just going back to my normal life, doing surgery, taking care of people, raising my family. And I think that after you go through something like this, it's like it's like there's other people still in the fight, like there's a Dr. Kirk Moore who he was about to go to trial July 7th, in one of the most corrupt COVID cases, right? They were going after him for fake vaccine cards, right? When he knew that what they were doing, like these vaccines were going to be dangerous. So it's like, like I had spent so much time like in the trenches taking grenades that like if I see other people in there, I can't help but like, I have to help fight them. And I feel like I'll still do that, but I'm just trying to go back to my normal life.
How has your perspective changed over the last 2 years? What would you say the biggest lesson or two that you've learned from your experience?
I think it's like what happens, like, if you believe in God, right? You believe in his commandments and his providence and his covenant, right? That like if these things are real, you just have to act in accordance to it. And if you do, then you'll always be rewarded no matter the consequence, because you're doing the right thing, right? Always. And the power of just average people to do something like me and my wife, we're just average people. We're no ones. And we were able to do all this, like to raise over $1 million and to tell this story to tens of millions of people, to fight back against the most powerful federal leviathan in human history, against the most omnipotent, omnipresent propaganda machine in human history. And because, all we were doing was just, we were fighting, for God's providence, right? It's like we were just doing what was correct, doing what was correct. And because of that, because we did it right, and we never gave up, we never gave in. And you win in the end. Even if I went to prison, I would have won in the end because, right?
Wow. Dr. Haim, thank you so much for your courage. It's truly inspiring. I think this is extremely eye-opening for everybody listening about what's at stake in the America that we love. And I think your example is a call to action for everyone to always speak the truth, to always follow our conscience, and not stand down when a bully shows up, even if that bully is the U.S. Department of Justice in the case that's so crazy that you've experienced. So thank you, thank you, thank you. How can people support you and the incredible voice that you are now to speak out against corruption?
So it's just givesendgo.com/Texas_whistleblower. And then, I'm on X. That's like the only thing. So.
Awesome. We'll definitely include those links. And thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy helping and serving patients. Thank you for all of your work, and thank you for taking the time for this interview.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Lila Rose Show. I think this topic is so important because I've seen it in the pro-life space. I've seen the power of government being wielded against American citizens who are pro-life, who are prayerfully and peacefully practicing their freedom of speech on public spaces outside abortion clinics, as an example, then being ultimately attacked by the government for their actions because the government is led by pro-abortion forces. That's why we've discussed the stories of people like Bevelyn Williams on this podcast before, a brave pro-life activist, or Joan Bell, or Mark Hawk, all of them prayerfully, peacefully trying to stand up for life. So what is happening in the defense of children, whether it is children that are being targeted for transgender treatments or children in the womb being targeted for destruction via abortion? Standing up for life, standing up for children matters. And it is crucial that we stand up too for our freedoms, to stand up for those that are in need. And so I hope that you share this episode with your friends, with your family, that you continue to support Dr. Haim if you haven't already. The link is in the description, as well as support groups like Alliance Defending Freedom, Live Action, and others who are providing legal support for those that are fighting these fights or publicizing their stories so that the public knows what they deserve to know. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the show if you're not already. Ring that notification bell if you're listening on YouTube. And if you're on podcast app, make sure that you are subscribed so you never miss another episode of The Lila Rose Show. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next time. And a huge thank you to EWTN, Eternal Word Television Network, which is the largest religious broadcaster in the world. You can get access to Lila Rose Show episodes 24 hours in advance at EWTN.com/on-demand. And a big thank you to EWTN and their incredible mission to bring souls to Jesus.